Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Vidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatam Chaiva Tato Jayamudirayet. Om. Welcome to our live webcast of our Vedantic teachings of the Mahabharata. You might know that this will be our final class on the Mahabharata after 5 years of classes. I'm just checking all this complicated stuff over here, and it all looks fine. Good. So we will see the final portion of the text and then have some nice concluding comments. So we have come to the Swarga Arohana Parva, the 18th and final Parva or book of the Mahabharata. Swarga Arohana, all the 5 Pandavas are and Draupadi, they are walking up towards the Himalayas, and one by one they all die. I gave all of this in some detail in the prior class. So let us turn to this final sequence of verses, which is narrated not by Yudhishthira or Sri Krishna, narrated not by Vaishampayana, the disciple of Vyasa, but this is the outermost story, which is narrated by Suta, Suta being a professional storyteller, who has been invited by King Shaunaka to the Naimisha Aranya, the famous forest of ancient times, where the king Shaunaka is performing a ritual that he does every 12 years. And in the intervals between portions of those rituals, King Shaunaka invites Suta to narrate portions of the Mahabharata. And that is really the outermost story. We have a story within a story within a story, as you know. And we end, not surprisingly, with the outermost story. In our prior class, we saw this verse in which in which Suta says to Shaunaka, Etat te samakyatam, all of this has been told to you. Vaishampayana kirtitam, all that was once narrated by Vaishampayana. So, and how did Vaishampayana know all of that to narrate it? Vyasa agnyaya samakyatam. It was first told by Vyasa to Vaishampayana, his disciple, and then later told by Vaishampayana to Suta, who is narrating this. So that's where we left off in our last class, and we proceed with the final verses in today's class. Punyo yameti hasakyaha, punyo yameti hasakyaha, pavitram chedamuttamam, pavitram chedamuttamam, krishnena munina vipra, krishnena munina vripra, niyatam satyavadina, niyatam satyavadina. This verse and the following verse praise Vyasa, the author of the Mahabharata, and then the next 2 verses will praise the Mahabharata itself. We'll see all of that as we continue. So, Suta says to King Shaunaka, he says, Punyaha ayam itihasa akyaha. We have to separate out all the words. Ayam, this text which is itihasa akyaha, this text which is called itihasa. Many of you know the word itihasa as history, and translating it as history is fine. Of course, this is really not the Mahabharata, this is worth pointing out. The Mahabharata is not a history book in the modern sense of the word. It's called itihasa, and itihasa indeed means history. But the ancient concept of history and the modern concept of history is very different. In modern times, historians strive to be as objective and accurate as possible. In ancient times, that wasn't the purpose at all. The purpose of Vyasa in composing this Mahabharata was to write the most compelling story possible that can teach people. Vyasa's intent was not to write a history book. Vyasa's intent was to teach. And he did so through these stories, and these stories have a historical basis. So having a historical basis, the Mahabharata is called itihasa, but not a history in modern terms. Just a comment. The word itihasa is actually a combination of three Sanskrit words, iti, ha, asa, iti, ha, asa, which means thus it was. Many stories ended with those three words, iti, ha, asa, thus it was. And because so many stories ended with those three words were concatenated. They were put together to form this new word, itihasa. So this itihasa, in modern times we call it epic. This epic poem, Mahabharata, is punyaha, it is sacred. It is pavitram in the second line. It is purifying. By the way, if you look up chedam in a dictionary, you'll be very disappointed. The words are cha, idam, cha and idam. This text, Mahabharata, is not just pavitram, uttamam pavitram, the most purifying, the most sacred, the most elevating in a spiritual sense. In the third line, Vipra, here Sutta addresses King Shaunaka. Vipra means Brahmana. O Brahmana, O Shaunaka. This text was in the fourth line, Niyatam. It was composed. Composed by who? Third line, Munina, by the sage. By which sage or rishi? By the sage or rishi, which one? Krishnena. Be careful now. Not Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna was not a Muni, was not a sage or a rishi. Here, Krishna is the name of Vyasa. Many of you know that a traditional name for Vyasa was Krishna Dvaipayana. Krishna, he was called Krishna because his skin was dark, and he was called Dvaipayana because he was born on a dvipa, on an island. You might remember the story of the fisherwoman Satyavati, who met this sage Parashara and bore a child, not through physical contact, but through some mystical means. Satyavati bore a child from Parashara. She bore that child on an island, and that's why Vyasa is called Krishna, dark-skinned, Dvaipayana, the one born on an island. And so this text, this sacred text, Mahabharata, was composed by Krishna, meaning by Vyasa, who was Satyavadina, who was a speaker of truth. And not just any ordinary truth, the highest truth, which is woven throughout the Mahabharata. We'll talk about those teachings in just a moment. The next verse goes on to praise Vyasa, the one by whom this text is written. Sarvajnena vidignena, sarvajnena vidignena, dharma jnana vatasata, dharma jnana vatasata, naika tantra vibuddhena, naika tantra vibuddhena, drishtva divyena chakshusha, drishtva divyena chakshusha. Sorry for my distraction. We're fine. I have to get used to this still. This is still quite new, all this live streaming. Excuse me. So here, Sutta goes on to describe and praise Vyasa, the one by whom this text was composed by. It was composed by Vyasa, who is Sarvajnena, by the omniscient one, the all-knowing one. Vidhi Jnana, by the one who knows Vidhi. Vidhi refers to all the rules of rituals. Can also mean karma, and it has several meanings. But in praise of Vyasa, either as the one who knows all the rituals of the Vedas, or the one who is able to see and understand another person's karma. Generally, karmas can't be understood by any human being, but Vyasa was not an ordinary human being, so he may have had this unique capacity to understand what are the karmas from past lives that would affect a person. Vyasa is also praised here as Dharma Jnana Vata, the one possessed of knowledge of Dharma. And that knowledge of Dharma is woven throughout the entire text. And that Vyasa is praised here as being Sata, composed by the saintly one. And the one who is Naika Tantra Vibuddhena, composed by Vyasa, who Vibuddha, who knows thoroughly, Naika Tantra, many, and here Tantra means school of thought. There are many different philosophical schools of thought that existed both in ancient times and in modern times. Some of you know the traditional Shaddarshana, 6 traditional schools of thought, the Nyaya and Vaisheshika, the Sankhya and Yoga, and the Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. I'm not going to explain all of that, but these are 6 examples of ancient philosophies, all of which were known to Vyasa. And all of this was composed by last line, by Vyasa, who, drishtva, Vyasa having seen all of the events described in the Mahabharata, Vyasa saw it, drishtva, having seen it all, divyena chakshusha, through his capacity for divya, divine, chakshu, sight. So Vyasa, as this amazing rishi, had this capacity to see and understand things that no one else could see, and see things without physically being there. Vyasa was not wandering around on the battlefield, nor was Vyasa always inside the palace in Hastinapur. Yet, whatever happened on the battlefield and whatever happened in the palace, all of this was known to Vyasa. So, due to his divya chakshus, his power of divine sight, he was able to see or know somehow everything that took place, everything that he later then described in the entire Mahabharata. So, these 2 verses then praise Vyasa. The next. Okay, I thought something happened here. Get that back. There we go. The next 2 verses, yeah, correct. The next 2 verses praise the text, Mahabharata. Dharme charte cha kame cha, dharme charte cha kame cha, mokshe cha bharatarshava, mokshe cha bharatarshava. Yadi hasti yattaranyatra, yadi hasti taranyatra, yanne hasti na tat kvachata, yanne hasti na tat kvachata. A few of you may recognize those last two verses, last two lines we'll come to in just a moment. Here, Sutta is summarizing the entire contents of the Mahabharata. He says that dharme, with regard to dharma, artecha, kamecha. Just to introduce this, many of you know the Vedic teaching of the four purusharthas, the four goals of life: dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Dharma, righteousness; artha, wealth and security; kama, pleasure; and moksha, liberation. This is frequently taught, a Vedic teaching, the four goals of life, as taught by the Vedic scriptures, and as taught here in the Mahabharata. So it says, dharmecha, with regard to dharma; artecha, with regard to artha, the second of those four goals; kamecha, with regard to kama, desire, the third of those four goals; mokshecha, and with regard to moksha, the fourth of the four goals. Bhartarshava Sutta addresses King Shaunaka, O mighty one. And these last two lines are often quoted. With regard to dharma, artha, kama, moksha, with regard to the four purusharthas, which is the essence of all Vedic teachings, he says, yat iha asti, iha, here, in this text in the Mahabharata, yat asti, whatever is here in this text, the Mahabharata, tat anyatra, that can be found elsewhere. Whatever is found here in the Mahabharata can be found elsewhere, because this massive text happens to be the source for many other spiritual teachings. But the clever point being made here is in the final line, yat na iha asti, iha, here in this text, yat na asti, that which is not here in this text, Mahabharata, na tat kvachita, that is not found anywhere else. Look at this, a little subtle, but you can get this easily. That which is here and that which is taught by the Mahabharata has been taught in many other places. But that which has not been taught in the Mahabharata is taught nowhere else. You can see the emphasis Sutta gives to this text as kind of the master key, as it were, the root text or source text for all teachings on dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So this is often quoted and very nicely said. That which is present in this text, Mahabharata, can be found elsewhere. It's taught elsewhere. But whatever has not been first taught in the Mahabharata, you can't find it anywhere else, because the Mahabharata is the most comprehensive text, certainly comprehensive in terms of size. No text approaches its length of 84,000 verses. So based on its size and its depth, it's not just long. I mean, just to say it's the longest text is kind of trivial, trite. But in those 84,000 verses, Vyasa teaches the most profound subject matters. So based on that, yat na iha asti, that which is not here in this Mahabharata, na tat kvachita, that can be found nowhere else. One more verse in praise of our text. Bharatadhyayanat punyat, Bharatadhyayanat punyat, api paramadhiyatah, shraddhadhanasya puyante, sarva papanya sheshatah, Bharata Adhyayanat. Adhyayana, study, especially sacred study. So sacred study of this Bharata. This text has three names. So Mahabharata, perhaps best known. It's also called Bharata, as it's called right here. It's also called Jaya. Our opening prayer, Tato Jayamudirayet. Narayanam namaskritya, having worshipped Narayana, having worshipped Nara, Purusha, and having worshipped Saraswati, Goddess Saraswati, tataha, thereafter, Jayam udirayet, as our opening prayer. Jayam, Jaya, not Jayam, Jaya, Jayaha, this text called Jaya. Jaya means victory, but it also happens to be a name for Mahabharata. Tato Jayam, Jaya udirayet, Jayam udirayet. So thereafter, Jayam, this Mahabharata, is taught. So that Jaya, Mahabharata, or here called Bharata, Bharata Adhyayanat. Through the sacred study of the Mahabharata, Punyat, which is very holy, which is very sacred, Apipadam Adhyataha. Adhyataha, from the study, Apipadam, of even a part of the Mahabharata. We're not talking about the whole 84,000 verses, but from the study of even a part of the sacred Mahabharata. What is the benefit of that? Shraddha dhanasya, excuse me. For one who has faith, for one who is devoted to this sacred study, in the last line, sarva papani, all sins, puyate, puyate, are purified, are removed. All sins are purified, are removed. Last word, asheshata, without exception. So, to paraphrase, if you study even a portion of this massive Mahabharata, it is so sacred and so powerful that even that partial study will bless you with the complete purification of sins. By the way, statements, you know this, statements like this are not meant to be taken literally. Does it mean if you take one verse out of the Mahabharata and study that one verse, all your sins are cleansed away? This is a literary device called stuti, praise. In English, in English poetics, they have a fancy word for it, hyperbole. Hyperbole means intentional exaggeration. So this is hyperbole. We call it stuti, praise. It's an intentional exaggeration to show the intense sacredness of this Mahabharata. Now, this is nice. Sutta continues to narrate. Urdhva bahur viraum yesha, urdhva bahur viraum yesha, nacha kaschit shrunoti me, nacha kaschit shrunoti me, dharmararthascha kamascha, dharmararthascha kamascha, sakyamartham na sevyate, sakyamartham na sevyate. Start in the second half. We just discussed the four Purusharthas, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Dharma, righteousness. Artha, wealth and security. Kama, pleasure. And Moksha, liberation. Look at the point he makes here. He says, Dharmat, in the third line, from the practice of Dharma, righteousness, Artha cha, Kamaha cha, you get artha, wealth, and kama, pleasure. What Sutta is doing here is putting emphasis on Dharma. Notice in the four Purusharthas, we always quote Dharma first. Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. You might want to put moksha first, since it's the ultimate goal. Or you might want to put kama first, since it's the most basic of the four goals. But consistently, we always quote dharma, artha, kama, moksha, because dharma is primary. Through the practice of dharma, everything else comes. Conversely, without the practice of dharma, nothing comes. You destroy your life. You make a terrible mess of your life. If you are following dharma puts you in a state of harmony with the world in general, with society and people in particular. When you live in harmony with others, you can do a lot in life. But when you live in disharmony, when you're in a constant state of conflict with the people around you and with governments and police, etc., when you are in a state of conflict, all of your attention and energy goes into dealing with those conflicts, and you are then deprived of advancing in other areas of your life. So this is just a very practical way of seeing the prime importance of dharma. Dharma comes first, and that's why Sutta says here, dharmat, from following dharma, from being righteous, consistently righteous, by living a righteous life, artha cha, kamaha cha, artha, wealth and security, and kama, the fulfillment of your pleasures, they follow. When you follow dharma, kama and artha will also come. And as I said before, if you don't follow dharma, they won't come. But that's not his point here. His point is, through following dharma, artha and kama will definitely come. So then he asks a question in the final line, kim artam, for what reason saha, that dharma, na sevyate, why is it not followed? Look at the point he's making. Dharma is primary. By following dharma, artha and kama will come. Also, following dharma will also help you gain moksha. If you don't follow dharma, you gain neither artha, kama, or moksha. So here, Sutta asks, with an amazement, you'll see his amazement in the first half. He says, why is it, since dharma is so primary, why is it that people don't live a dharmic life? Why do so many people fail to live a dharmic life? Sutta expresses his amazement about this. It also relates to our text, Mahabharata. Every text, every scripture, has a certain focus. The scripture can contain many different topics, many different subject matters, but that scripture will probably have one main focus. The main focus of the first part of the Vedas, the main focus is rituals. So the focal point of Vedic scriptures is rituals. The last part of the Vedas, which we call Upanishad, the focus of those Upanishads is spiritual wisdom, spiritual knowledge. Now, in the first part of the Vedas, in addition to rituals, there are many other subject matters, but rituals are primary. In the Upanishads, there are many other subject matters, but knowledge is primary. Similarly, other scriptures, if we consider the Puranas, the texts that contain all of the mythological stories of the gods and saints and sages, the Puranas, their primary focus is to cultivate devotion. So the Puranas will tell stories of great saints and sages to help cultivate devotion. The Puranas will tell stories about various gods to cultivate devotion. So they have other topics as well. Point is, there's a primary focus on devotion. So, the Vedas, first part of the Vedas, have a focus on ritual worship. The second part of the Vedas, Upanishads, has a focus on spiritual knowledge. The Puranas have a focus on cultivating devotion. So when we turn to the Mahabharata, and we can include the Ramayana as well, they're both epics, they're both itihasa. So what would we say is the focus of the Mahabharata? Contains many subject matters, but which topic is primary? Without a doubt, the primary topic is Dharma. And woven from the beginning to the end, and both in the Ramayana, but especially in the Mahabharata, one of the most brilliant things the Mahabharata does is show how the principles of Dharma apply in extraordinarily complicated situations. The plot of the Mahabharata is as complicated as you can imagine. And I can't imagine a story having a more complicated plot. With all of these, in Sanskrit we use a term dharma sankata. Sankata means conflict. Dharma sankata is a situation in which it's unclear what is the path of dharma. Situations can be so complicated that it's not obvious which is the path of dharma, which is the path of adharma. But this Mahabharata considers so many dharma sankatas and deals with so many complex issues that the Mahabharata is the foremost text in teaching dharma. So that's the basis for Sutta's comment here. He says, since artha and kama can be gained through following dharma, and since dharma is the main subject of the Mahabharata, he then wonders, kim artham? For what reason sahana sevyate? Why don't people get it in American English? Why don't they get it? Why don't people understand that following dharma is the key to life? And he makes this point really vivid in the first half. He says, Urdhva bahuhu viraumi eshaha. Esha, this point, that dharma is the most important. He says viraumi. Viraumi, literally, I shout. I shout, Urdhva bahuhu, with my arms raised. With my arms raised, I am viraumi. I'm shouting this. I'm shouting what? That dharma is the most important. And he says, nacha, but nakaschat shranoti me. But no one listens to me. He says, I'm shouting this at the top of my lungs, that dharma is the most important key to a successful life. And he says, I shout this with my arms raised, and no one listens to me. How many teachers throughout history must have had that frustration, teaching and teaching and teaching, and people don't get it? Sutta has narrated this Mahabharata many times, and he must be frustrated at this point that in spite of narrating it, many of the people who heard his narration of the Mahabharata, they didn't get it. They didn't understand the importance and centrality of following dharma. This is a complaint made by many teachers. I remember my guru, Pujya Swami Dayananda, making a similar comment. He said he's been teaching for decades, and he understands that a great many listeners don't get it. What is a teacher to do? So he explained very simply and very correctly that if he were to stop teaching because not everyone gets it, then what a terrible penalty for those who can get it. So even though many don't get it, it's a teacher's responsibility to go on teaching and teaching and teaching. I guess karma nyeva adhikaraste, in the famous verse from the Bhagavad Gita. You go on doing what you're supposed to do without worrying about the results. You follow Dharma, you do the right thing, and the results are not in your hands, the results are in Bhagavan's hands. Message of Karma Yoga. Okay. In praise of the Mahabharata, Sutta says, Yatha samudro bhagavan, yatha samudro bhagavan, yatha chahimavan girihi, yatha chahimavan girihi, khyatha vubhau ratnanidhi, khyatha vubhau ratnanidhi, tatha bharatam uchyate, tatha bharatam uchyate. He gives a nice metaphor. Yatha, just as, samudraha bhagavan. Bhagavan here meaning Lord, but here the great samudra, ocean. Samudra bhagavan, the great ocean. Just as in the great ocean, yathacha himavan girihi, and just like in the giri, in the mountains, himavan, the Himalayas, just like in the great ocean and in the great Himalaya mountains, he says, ubhau khyatau, breaking those two words apart, khyatau ubhau, ubhau, both the great ocean and the great Himalayas, both of them khyatau, are renowned. Are renowned how? Ratna nidhi, as being, nidhi here means abode. They are abodes of ratna, gems. Both the great ocean and the mountains are abodes of gems. I don't know what gems are there, but this is poetry, so stay focused on that. The point here is there's something subtle here. What makes a gem valuable? A gem is just a rock, right? A diamond is a rock. And it's a rock made of carbon, one of the most common elements. So why is this rock that we call diamond, why is it so valuable? It's rare. It's not an ordinary rock by any means. It's a rare rock. Call it a gem. And in the Himalayas and on the bottom of the ocean, there are how many rocks? Countless rocks in the mountains and on the bottom of the oceans. But amongst all of those ordinary rocks are a handful of precious gems. It's like diamonds. That's the metaphor. Amongst all of these ordinary rocks, there are a handful of gems. What does the metaphor represent? Amongst all ordinary texts and scriptures and words and sentences and statements, amongst this vast universe of words and language and texts and ideas, there is one amazing gem. All the other words and texts are ordinary. There is one text that is extraordinary, a gem among other texts. Tatha bharatam uchyate. Just as these rare gems can be found in the Himalayas on the bottom of the ocean, in the same way, this Mahabharata, here it's just called Bharata, this Mahabharata is such a rare gem amongst world literature. There's no doubt. Amongst world literature, this Mahabharata is a rare gem, the most valuable. Leading us to our final verse. Mahabharatamakyanam, Mahabharatamakyanam, yah patet susamahitaha, yah patet susamahitaha, sagachet paramam siddhim, sagachet paramam siddhim, iti me nasti samshayah, iti me nasti samshayah. Start in the second line. Yaha patet. Let me introduce this verse very briefly. It is a convention in Sanskrit literature to conclude any text, any composition, any poem, any song, anything that you compose. It's a convention to conclude with what's called pala shruti. Pala shruti means a statement of the pala benefit. So statement of benefit means what do you get out? What is the blessing you get from the reading or study of that particular composition? In this case, from the reading or study of Mahabharata. So that's called pala shruti, statement of benefit, and that's how the text concludes. Mahabharatam akyatam yaha patet. Yaha in the second line. One who, patet, studies. One who studies this Mahabharatam, this great Mahabharata, akhyanam, this story, this text, Mahabharata. So one who studies this great Mahabharata, susamahitaha, with tremendous concentration, with great dedication, which means not casually, but one who's really concentrating and dedicated to these teachings. Such a person, saha gachet, that person reaches paramam siddhim, the greatest goal, the ultimate perfection. That person reaches moksha, liberation. Remember what I said before about hyperbole, intentional exaggeration? Certainly this is another case of hyperbole, intentional exaggeration. If you want to, it's like in modern advertising. If you want to advertise your product, suppose your product is toothpaste. How do you advertise that product, toothpaste? You don't say it's pretty good. Try our toothpaste, it's pretty good. No one will buy it. You have to say, our toothpaste is absolutely the best. In the entire universe, our toothpaste is the best. Hyperbole. Necessary. And it has a point. And that's the kind of hyperbole we find here. It says, one who studies this great Mahabharata with concentration, that person reaches supreme perfection, moksha. Sutta concludes, iti, thus, me nasti samshaya, I have no doubt about this. One who studies this text can reach ultimate perfection, moksha. With that hyperbole, with that palashruti, our text comes to an end. We have a few minutes now at the end of the class to maybe let's review briefly our 5 years of study of this Mahabharata. We began in 2015. In fact, before we began, let me tell you the bit of a story. I think I told this 5 years ago. You may not remember. But in 2015, we were coming to the end of our study of the Bhagavad Gita. In fact, it was the 3rd time we had studied the Bhagavad Gita here. And I wanted to have another text that we would study after concluding the Bhagavad Gita, but it had to be the right kind of text. I mentioned before, every kind of text has a certain focus. The focus of the Bhagavad Gita is spiritual life in the context of, spiritual growth, spiritual teachings, in the context of day-to-day life. Notice the spiritual teachings found in Upanishads don't have that focus. Spiritual teachings are there, but they're most certainly not in the context of day-to-day life as they are in the Bhagavad Gita. So I wanted to teach a similar text that would present spiritual teachings in the context of day-to-day life. Of course, as you know well, the Bhagavad Gita is a portion of the Mahabharata, the 700-verse section excerpted out of the 12th book of the Mahabharata. So I thought, why not we look at other portions of the Mahabharata for other sections that deal with spiritual teaching. Now, the bulk of the Mahabharata is story. Wonderful story. But the purpose of our classes is not to tell stories. Stories are wonderful, and this story is more than wonderful, but our purpose is spiritual teaching. So what I did was I went through the Mahabharata to identify sections that had very important spiritual teachings, and I wanted to excerpt those sections. In addition to the Bhagavad Gita, all of these other sections. The way I did it, again, I told this story 5 years ago, but to retell it now, 5 years later, my approach, how to go through the entire Mahabharata, it's a big job. I started with a word-for-word English translation, which was done by a person whose name is Ganguly. Ganguly wrote this word-for-word translation. By the way, it's freely available on the internet, and it is word for word. It is the original Mahabharata. And the reason I consulted that is I wanted to scan through the Mahabharata to find the passages that had spiritual teachings. Now, for me, I can scan much more quickly in English than I can scan in Sanskrit. In Sanskrit I can manage, but English is my mother language, so I'm quicker. So what I did is I would go through the English word-for-word translation of the Mahabharata, scan very quickly until I found some spiritual teachings. Then I'd set the English aside, pick up the Sanskrit, and read the entire chapter. Whatever chapter that contained those spiritual teachings, I read the entire chapter. I ended up reading 200 chapters of the Mahabharata. By the way, the Mahabharata is almost 2,000 chapters in length. So I spent about 6 months working on this. In those 6 months, I read 200 chapters, roughly 10% of the Mahabharata. By the way, if it took me 6 months to read 1/10 of the Mahabharata, how long would it take me to read the entire text? You can figure out the math for yourself. Anyway, the point here is, having studied those 200 chapters that contain spiritual teachings, I then excerpted from those chapters certain verses that were relevant to our Vedantic study. So first we go from 2,000 chapters to 200, and then within those 200 chapters, I excerpted passages that were relevant for our study, and ended up excerpting about 1,800 verses. So for these 5 years, we've been studying these 1,800 verses. You can see the final verse on the screen here, and it's been an absolutely wonderful study. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed it. I should mention, by the way, just seeing that verse, I want to thank 2 of our students who volunteered to prepare all of these slides that you see. Pinky Patel and Deepak Moghe were kind enough to, big job. So 1,800 slides they had to prepare. And then, of course, I had to prepare the translations for each of those slides. A big job, but such a rewarding investment of effort. I can't tell you how meaningful it has been for me to share these 5 years of classes with you, to go through these wonderful, wonderful Vedantic teachings of the Mahabharata. It's been just an amazing 5 years, a delightful, extremely rewarding period of study. Now, as we come to the end of our class, we should mention that today happens to be Guru Purnima. Today is, what is it, July 4th. July 3rd, excuse me. July 3rd. Is it 4th? Today is July 4th. I'm not very good on calendar, apparently. Anyway, today, July 4th, is the day it is July 4th, and it is the day of Guru Purnima. Many of you know that Guru Purnima is actually Vyasa Purnima. Purnima is the day of the full moon. Vyasa Purnima is the day we celebrate as the birthday of Vyasa, when he was born of Satyavati on that island. Vyasa Purnima is the day that we believe he was born, and we celebrate his birthday by honoring all of our gurus, which is why we call the day Guru Purnima. But originally Vyasa Purnima, and what an amazing coincidence, and a very nice coincidence, that we conclude our study of the Mahabharata, authored by Vyasa, on Vyasa Purnima itself. The importance of Vyasa in our tradition can't be underestimated. He is, as we've just discussed, the author of this great Mahabharata, also the author of 18 Puranas, these huge mythological texts full of all of these stories. He's the author of the 18 Mahapuranas, and as you also know, he is the rishi who compiled the Vedas into their current form. Originally, the Vedas were independent teachings of independent rishis, and all of those independent teachings had to be compiled into the 4 books that we now know as the 4 Vedas. And it is Vyasa who is considered to be the compiler of the Vedas. In fact, the name Vyasa means one who compiles, compiler, Vyasa. And this name is a little significant. We saw before his more traditional name is actually Krishna Dvaipayana, the dark-skinned one who was born on the island. But we most commonly refer to him as Vyasa because it's like a title. It's a title given to the one who has compiled this wealth of scriptures, Vedas, Mahabharata, 18 Mahapuranas. These great scriptures are the essence of the Hindu tradition, the core of the Hindu tradition, the backbone, as it were, of the Hindu tradition. All of this, for all of this, we have Vyasa to give our gratitude to. One might argue, how could one historical person compile the Vedas, write the 84,000 verse Mahabharata, and write these 18 Mahapuranas? I think they come to 200,000 or 300,000 verses, adding up those other texts. If somebody says, how could one historical person do all of that? Fine. It need not be one historical person. There was a historical person who compiled the Vedas. We call that person Veda Vyasa. And perhaps this is all ancient history, so we don't know the details, but we can surmise that Vyasa's disciples, or even his family tradition, so Vyasa's ancestors and disciples were then the later Vyasas, holding the title Vyasa, later Vyasas who were responsible then for writing the Mahabharata and the 18 Mahapuranas, doesn't make any difference whether there's one historical person or a lineage of Vyasas. It makes no difference. What is important is the value of these texts of Vyasa. The value and importance to our tradition, just absolutely crucial. And on Guru Purnima, then we honor not only Vyasa, the author of all of these great important texts, but also all of our gurus, all of our teachers throughout history. And I need to honor and respect my own guru, Puja Swami Dayananda. We're coming up on almost 5 years since his Mahasamadhi. So still hold him always will hold my guru very dear in my heart. He gave me so much. Okay, with that we come to the end of our study of the Mahabharata and acknowledging Vyasa as its author. Our live webcasts, of course, will continue every Saturday morning. That's our commitment. So every Saturday at the same time, we'll continue our webcasts. Now that we're concluding our study of the Mahabharata, the next text we're going to take is Shankaracharya's famous text called Atma Bodha, self-knowledge. It's a short text, 67 verses compared to 84,000, or compared to the 1,800 verses that we've just finished studying. So 67 verses, is quite short, but wonderful. I think Atma Bodha is my favorite Vedantic text. And for a reason. I'll explain this more in the first class, but it's almost like, remember when you were a child, you liked the books that had pictures in it. Picture books. We all like, as children, we all like picture books. This is a funny metaphor, but Atma Bodha is like a Vedantic picture book. Now, there are no pictures, obviously, but almost every verse has a drishtanta, a metaphor. And these metaphors are like pictures in words. And these metaphors are delightful. We call them drishtantas. So in those 67 verses, we have almost 67 drishtantas, 67 verbal pictures. And this emphasis on the use of metaphor makes that text absolutely delightful, like we find, like as children, we found picture books delightful. So I'm looking forward to that study. We will begin next Saturday. I think you know that all of these texts of the Mahabharata and of the future Atma Bodha text, all of this is available on our website. You can get the written form if you want to print it out for your study. You can also get audios if you want to listen while you're in your car or anything. And of course, all of these classes will continue to be posted to our YouTube channel. So I thank you for being a part of these 5 years of classes. It's been absolutely wonderful, so rewarding. Thank you. We'll conclude with our prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaveta Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat Om